In the far western tip of Michigan's Upper Peninsula, there's a stretch of highway where almost every clear night, a small point of light rises out of a dark valley, hovers, brightens, and disappears. And nobody has ever fully, definitively explained what it is. That's where we're ending tonight, in a town so small it barely shows up on a map, where land is cheap, neighbors are few, and the woods keep at least one genuine unresolved mystery. But before we get there, we're crossing the entire Upper Peninsula, one town at a time, looking at 12 places where a few $1,000s, sometimes a few hundred, can still buy you a foothold on some of the last truly empty land east of the Mississippi. This isn't a listicle of pretty cabins pulled off a real estate site. Every town on this list is real, verified, and still standing. Some just barely. We'll look at what they cost, why they emptied out, and what's still sitting under the snow and the pine needles. Before we start, a few quick facts that apply to every town on this list. Michigan does charge a state income tax, a flat 4.25%. So unlike the tax-free states people usually chase for off-grid living, that bill still shows up here. Building is regulated statewide, too, under a single uniform construction code, so a well, a septic system, and a permit are part of the deal almost anywhere you build. Zoning is genuinely optional under state law, meaning some townships on this list have none at all, while others fall under a county ordinance instead. So you check with a specific township before you buy, not after. And there is a real break on the property tax side worth knowing about. Michigan lets homeowners file what's called a principal residence exemption, a simple affidavit with the local tax office that removes your primary home from the local school operating tax, typically as much as 18 mills, a tax that still applies in full to vacant land, second homes, and rental property. That single form is often the difference between a manageable tax bill out here and a surprising one. Stick around, because the mystery we just opened with only gets stranger the closer we get to it. If you're the kind of person who likes finding places the rest of the country forgot about, go ahead and hit subscribe before we start, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight, because I'm always curious how far this kind of thing actually travels. All right, let's start at number 12. Number 12. Ewen, Michigan, tucked into Ontonagon County along Highway M28, roughly halfway between Wakefield and the Baraga County line. According to the most recent census, Ewen holds a population of 229 people, spread across less than a square mile of platted land, though the surrounding township stretches into thousands of acres of second-growth forest that never fully recovered from a century of clear-cut logging. Land here regularly lists for a few $1,000s an acre, and off-grid parcels on the outskirts with no power lines nearby can go for even less. What Ewen offers isn't excitement, it's quiet. Winters bury the town under some of the heaviest snowfall totals in the Midwest, snow that piles high enough to swallow porch railings and turn gravel roads into narrow, plowed corridors between white walls. Most of the original commercial buildings from the logging era are gone, but a handful of the town's oldest homes still stand on their original foundations, heated the way settlers heated them a century ago, with wood and nothing else. It's the kind of place where off-grid living isn't a lifestyle choice. It's just how things have always been done here. And that theme, self-sufficiency out of necessity rather than trend, is going to follow us through every town on this list, starting with the next one, which trades Ewen's quiet logging routes for a harbor town built at the literal end of the road. Number 11. Grand Marais, sitting on the shore of Lake Superior in Alger County, right at the eastern gateway to the Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. The town was established in 1882 and today counts 234 year-round residents according to the latest census, though that number feels generous once October hits and the summer tourist season empties out completely. What makes Grand Marais different from other towns on this list is that it isn't dying from a mine closing or a mill shutting down. It was built small from the start as a working harbor town, and it has simply stayed small. Because it sits at the literal end of the paved road with the nearest larger town over an hour away, property here tends to be cheaper than its lakefront views would suggest anywhere else in the country. You can still find modest homes and buildable lots at a fraction of what comparable Great Lakes shoreline costs downstate. The trade-off is total. No big box stores nearby, spotty cell service in places, and a 9-month stretch where you genuinely need to plan ahead for supplies. For people chasing true isolation on the water instead of the forest, Grand Marais is about as far as you can get in Michigan. And speaking of far, our next stop trades this quiet harbor for a resort town that built its whole modern identity around something most struggling mining towns never managed to find: a second act. Number 10, Wakefield in Gogebic County, close to the Wisconsin border. Wakefield was platted in 1886 by a lumberman and land speculator named George Wakefield, and for decades it lived and died by logging and mining. The same story as most of the towns across Michigan's copper country and iron range. Today, it holds 1,702 residents, making it one of the larger communities on this list. But its housing market tells the same story as its smaller neighbors, with modest homes here regularly selling for a fraction of the national median. What sets Wakefield apart is Sunday Lake, sitting right inside city limits, and the Snow River Mountain Resort just outside of town, which gives Wakefield something rare for this region: a real, if modest, economic pulse built on tourism rather than extraction. Even so, large stretches of the surrounding township remain heavily wooded and thinly populated, with off-grid parcels available well outside the city's small core. It's a strange kind of hybrid, a place where you can still buy remote land cheap, but you're never more than a short drive from a lake, a hardware store, and a lit-up main street. That balance won't last on this list for long, though, because the next town on our countdown drops the ski resort entirely and takes us back to bare copper rock and a mine that shut down for the final time the moment copper prices fell below 11 cents a pound. Number 9. Rockland, Ontonagon County. Population 173 as of the most recent census. Rockland sits close to two of the most storied copper operations in Michigan history. The Minnesota mine, opened in 1847 and worked until 1876, and the nearby Victoria mine, which ran on and off from 1849 until its final closure in 1921. The Victoria mine story is almost a lesson in how these towns died. It survived the post-World War I price crash longer than most competitors thanks to a cheaper compressed air power system. But when copper fell to 11 cents a pound, even that wasn't enough, and the mine shut for good. After the closure, a power company dammed the Ontonagon River nearby and created what's now called the Victoria Flowage, a 5-mile artificial lake that today draws a small trickle of fishermen and kayakers instead of miners. What's left of Rockland is a scattering of homes along the highway, several with acreage attached, priced well under what comparable rural land costs south of the bridge. It's proof some of these old copper towns didn't just fade, they got repurposed by the very industry that had abandoned them. Our next stop follows that same copper vein north into a town with the steepest population collapse on this entire list. Number 8. Marenisco in Gogebic County, right along U.S. Route 2. This one has the sharpest decline of any town we're covering tonight. Marenisco Township, the broader area including the town itself, held 1,727 people as recently as 2010. By the 2020 census, that number had fallen to 455, a drop of nearly three-quarters in a single decade. The unincorporated community of Marenisco proper now counts just 179 residents. That kind of decline usually means one thing in the Upper Peninsula. The timber and rail economy that built the township isn't there anymore, and younger residents have left for work elsewhere, leaving behind housing stock the market can't price at anything close to what it would cost to build new today. For someone chasing cheap acreage and total quiet, that collapse is effectively an opportunity, since large tracts of formerly logged land here sell for a fraction of their price a generation ago, much of it bordering the Ottawa National Forest. It's one of the clearest examples on this list of a town that didn't decline gradually. It fell off a cliff. And what's left standing is what you'd actually be moving into. From here, we head east into Marquette County, to a lakeside town whose very name means big water, and whose winters test that name every year. Number 7. Michigamme, Marquette County. Population 255 according to the 2020 census. The name comes from an Ojibwe word, pronounced Michigamme, roughly translating to big water, after the lake the town sits beside. Michigamme grew up as an iron mining settlement in the 19th century, and though the mines closed long ago, the lake they were built beside remains the town's defining feature. Clear, cold, and ringed by forest that's barely changed in 100 years. Housing right along the water can carry a premium, the way lakefront property does anywhere, but move even a short distance back from the shoreline and prices drop fast, especially on wooded unserviced parcels with no municipal utilities at all. That's the pattern across almost this entire region. Waterfront costs money. Everything behind it is nearly given away. Michigamme's isolation is real. The nearest hospital is a genuine drive. Not a quick trip, but for people who've already decided that's an acceptable trade-off for solitude, it's one of the more scenic bargains left in the Upper Peninsula. Scenery takes a back seat next, though, because our next stop is the county seat of Ontonagon County itself, a town that didn't just lose one industry, but three. In a slow-motion collapse, local officials are still trying to reverse. Number 6. Ontonagon. The county seat of Ontonagon County, population 1,285, sitting where the Ontonagon River meets Lake Superior. Founded in 1843, Ontonagon spent well over a century as one of the Upper Peninsula's genuine working towns. A copper mine, a shipyard, and eventually a large paper mill run by the Smurfit Stone Container Corporation all operated here at different points. Then, one by one, they all closed. The copper mine went first, the shipyard followed, and the paper mill, by then the town's last major employer, shut down for good in the 2000s. Local reporting at the time described empty storefronts along the main street and a town playground, with almost nobody using it on a sunny afternoon. Streets still carry names like Iron and Conglomerate, leftovers from the mining boom that named them. The numbers back up that decline. As of late 2025, the median home sale price across the county sits around $115,000, with modest homes inside the village itself closing well under that, and vacant residential lots changing hands for as little as $12,000 to $28,000. What that leaves behind, though, is a real town. Not a ghost town, not a summer-only resort, with actual infrastructure, a harbor, a school system, and a housing market that reflects decades of population loss more than any real lack of livability. For someone willing to work remotely or bring their own income, Ontonagon offers something almost none of the tiny towns on this list can: a functioning downtown at a fraction of the cost of living elsewhere in the state. If towns like this are keeping you interested, this is usually about the point where I remind you that hitting subscribe costs nothing and genuinely helps this channel keep finding places like these. So if you haven't already, now's a good time. From the county seat, we head north to a town built entirely around one private hunting club, a historic inn, and a lake so clean it barely needs treating. Number 5. Big Bay, Marquette County, population 257, founded in 1875 on the shore of Lake Superior's Big Bay itself. This is one of the more storied entries on our list. Big Bay is home to the Thunder Bay Inn, a historic lodge, and sits just outside the boundary of the Huron Mountain Club, a private hunting and fishing club formed around 1890 that still limits its membership to 50 families and controls nearly 26,000 acres of old-growth forest the public can't access at all. That's one of the largest surviving tracts of primeval forest left in the entire Great Lakes region, sealed off behind private gates for well over a century. Big Bay itself, though, is open to anyone with the means to buy in. Modest homes and wooded lots sell for a fraction of what waterfront property commands almost anywhere else on the Great Lakes, largely because of the sheer distance from anything resembling a city, with Marquette the nearest real population center, a 50-mile round trip on a good day. What you're buying into is proximity to genuine wilderness, some of it locked away behind a private club's gate, and the rest yours to homestead if you're willing to live without the conveniences everyone else takes for granted. From here, we go back into Copper Country one more time, to a town whose very name honors the man who dug it out of the ground, a man who was, by any definition, still fighting for his own freedom before he ever swung a pick. Number 4. Mass City, Ontonagon County, population 148. Mass City has, without question, the most remarkable founding story of any town on this list. It was first settled in 1848 by a man named Noel Johnson, who had escaped enslavement in Missouri and made his way north into the wilderness of the Upper Peninsula, where he discovered copper deposits in the area. Johnson later sold those deposits to the Mass Mining Company, and the settlement that grew up around the find was formally organized in 1855, taking its name from the mass copper pulled out of the ground there, copper found in large, solid chunks rather than scattered ore. That single discovery, made by a man who had risked his life for freedom just a few years earlier, helped kick off part of the copper rush that would define this entire region for the next 70 years. Today, Mass City is quiet in the extreme, a scattering of homes near the Adventure Mine, which still offers underground tours of the original 19th century workings. Land here is inexpensive even by Upper Peninsula standards, and the pace of life reflects a town that peaked more than a century ago and has been gently declining ever since. It's a strange kind of monument, a nearly empty town founded by a man who had every reason to disappear into anonymity, and instead put his name into Michigan's mining history for good. From here, we head to the very tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula, to the northernmost town in the state, a place where winter doesn't end so much as refuse to leave. Number 3. Copper Harbor, Keweenaw County, population 136, and officially the northernmost permanently populated community in the state of Michigan. Established in 1844 during the earliest wave of the copper rush, Copper Harbor sits at the literal end of U.S. Route 41. Drive north on that highway, and Copper Harbor is where the road simply stops. The isolation here isn't seasonal exaggeration. It's structural. Lake effect snow off Lake Superior routinely buries the town under storm totals that can run well into the hundreds of inches over a winter. And for stretches of the coldest months, the two-lane road in and out can become the only real connection to the outside world. Property values here run a wider spread than most of this list, from vacant lots in the $25,000 range on the edges of town up to lakefront homes well into the six figures right along the harbor, which tells you the isolation applies more to the winter than to the price of everything. The play, like everywhere else on this list, is to buy back from the water, not on it, trading a little view for a genuine seasonal isolation that would cost far more anywhere near a major city. Two towns remain, and both of them carry a history that moves past simple hardship and into something genuinely strange, starting with a mine and a railroad that were both, in their own separate ways, monuments to failure. Number 2, Champion, Marquette County, part of Champion Township, which held 250 residents at the most recent census. Champion grew up around the Champion Iron Mine, and a post office under that name has operated in the community since 1869. But the real story here isn't the mine itself, it's what got built to serve it. In the late 19th century, investors began construction on the Huron Bay and Iron Range Railway, a rail line meant to carry roughly 35 miles of track from Champion through rocky gorges and swampland, all the way to a massive ore dock built at Huron Bay on Lake Superior's Keweenaw Bay. The promoters spent roughly $2 million, an enormous sum for the era, building docks, warehouses, and homes at Huron Bay in anticipation of the business the railway would bring. The railway never carried a single load of ore. It never ran a train of cars at all. The investment collapsed. The ore dock and buildings at Huron Bay were abandoned, and today, almost nothing remains except rusted nails, old telegraph poles, and the outline of a rail bed disappearing back into the forest floor of the Huron Mountains. Champion itself survived, smaller and quieter, a real town where land remains inexpensive and mostly wooded. But a short drive from its center sits one of the strangest failed infrastructure projects in Michigan history, a $2 million railroad that moved absolutely nothing. And that brings us to number 1, the town that opened this video, and the one genuine, still unexplained mystery on this entire list. Number 1, Paulding, an unincorporated community in Haight Township, Ontonagon County, where the township's total population sits at 203, according to the most recent census. Paulding sits along U.S. Route 45, and like most of the towns on this list, it offers exactly what you'd expect from the deep Upper Peninsula: cheap, heavily wooded land, brutal winters, and enough distance from anywhere else that self-sufficiency stops being optional and starts being the default. But Paulding carries something none of the other 11 towns have: an actual, ongoing, unexplained phenomenon. Just outside town, in a valley along an old stretch of highway now known as Robbins Pond Road, a small point of light has been reported almost every clear night since at least 1966, when a group of teenagers first told a local sheriff about it. It's known as the Paulding Light, and the most popular version of local folklore ties it to the ghost of a railroad brakeman killed in the valley trying to stop a train from colliding with cars stopped on the tracks, his lantern, the story goes, still swinging in the dark, forever failing to flag down the train in time. What's actually documented is more grounded, but almost stranger for how mundane it is. In 2010, students and researchers from Michigan Technological University conducted a formal investigation and were able to see distant automobile headlights and taillights through a telescope pointed at the exact spot where the light appears, later reproducing the effect by driving a car along a specific stretch of U.S. Highway 45 visible from the viewing area. Skeptics consider that case closed. And yet, night after night, people still drive out to that same overlook and wait, because knowing the leading explanation doesn't make the light any less unsettling to actually sit and watch, hovering, brightening, and disappearing into one of the emptiest, cheapest, quietest corners of the entire state. That's Paulding, a town where you really can buy land for almost nothing, live almost entirely off the grid, and fall asleep every night about a mile from a mystery nobody has fully closed the book on. That's all 12. Copper towns, logging towns. One town founded by a man who freed himself from slavery and turned a copper strike into a piece of state history. And one town still watched over by a light nobody has ever fully explained. If any of these has you pulling up listings tonight, do the boring part first. Call the township, confirm the zoning, file for that principal residence exemption the day you close, and price out a well and septic before you price the land, because that's where the real cost of almost nothing tends to hide. If you made it this far, you already know this part of Michigan doesn't hand out its history easily. You have to go looking for it, same as the cheap land. If there's a town you want covered next, drop it in the comments and I'll see you in the next one.